Good morning. Boy, it is a great day. It is raining outside, but it's not raining inside. We have a roof over our head. We get to study our Bibles. We get to be together as Christians. It's hard to get much better than that. We are ending quarter 3, and so next Sunday, you will have a far superior preacher in the pulpit with Mark Roberts. I'm so glad nobody amened that. There's always like a risk when you say that. It's true, but I don't like to know it. You know, it's like one of those balance things. But today we're finishing up quarter 3 and talking about being the family of God. And this last month we focused on taking action as Christians. The passage that was read in Luke chapter 12 there, that we are to keep our lamps lit, be dressed in readiness and keep our lamps lit. The family identity of the church has always been a going identity, a being ready to go or a doing mentality. It begins with the Great Commission and go therefore and make disciples, and then it continues through as you move forward as the disciples grow, so they then go and spread the word further. It's a going and doing, it's a living faith that we've been told to have. And it's such a living and active faith that not only is that true as you progress forward into the New Testament, but as you pan your mind back into the Old Testament, you see the exact same thing. Hebrews chapter 12 says, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us." Hebrews 12 is the ending of Hebrews 11, which lists all of these faithful people who've gone before. So he says, you look back and you see who they were, and then you can look forward to run the race that is set before you. And he describes it and compares it to a cloud. You have such a great cloud of witnesses, which gets me thinking, it's like, why do we call it a cloud? And it actually is a beautiful image that's been provided. You think about whenever you're flying and you start to descend from that 30,000 foot altitude and you descend down and you're going to go land, there's typically a point where you cross and you descend into the clouds. And as you descend into the clouds, you can see absolutely nothing but the clouds. Because that's all a cloud is such densely packed together vapor molecules that you can't see anything else. In fact, if there's a cloud down here on Earth that you are in, we don't call it a cloud, we call it fog. The imagery that we're given in Hebrews 12 is, if you begin to surround yourself in your mind's eye with all those who've lived before, and you begin to try and see God through His people, through the Moseses and the Davids and the Sarahs and the Esthers, when you begin to see Him through the Gideons and the Samsons, when you begin to know all of these people, the Josephs who lived before, and you surround your mind with those people, it is like you're so densely surrounded by people who have lived lives of action that you cannot get away from it. Because the Hebrews 11 picture of faith is one of doing things. It's one of going. It's David marching into battle, and it's Deborah facing the throngs that sought her judgment. It's Noah building the impossible boat. It's people living and doing things that are hard and have an impact long beyond themselves, things with legacy value to them, where God is using people to put them in a position to do greater things than they could ever do individually. They become a part of that great Swiss watch, where every gear and every part and every spring has a place, pushing and pulling and bringing things into synchronization with God's plan. The idea of Hebrews 12 is that you are surrounded by action hero people. Because really, if you read back in Hebrews 11, you read about all the things those people did, they were action heroes. I mean, they've even made movies around some of this stuff. When you get Charlton Heston saying, I want to be that guy, that's an action hero. The fact is an action hero, you think about action figures, right? Kids, they go and they buy action figures. Do you know why we call it an action figure other than to make boys feel better about playing with dolls? Why do we call it an action figure? It's because it's posable. Right? That's the thing with the action figures. You get a kid with a Marvel character or a Transformer or something like that, and they can pose it in action. You can see it in the position of doing something. Try and think of Moses without thinking of him doing. And you can't do it. Because you don't know what Moses looked like. And you don't know what Noah looked like. And you don't know what Joseph looked like. But you know the things they did. When you picture Noah, probably you picture him with lumber in hand, or hammer swinging, or riding a boat. You picture him in the action of that which he is doing. My question to you is, when the report comes in at the end, what action will you be seen doing? What will your identity be? In what position will you be posed? Will it be sitting in front of the TV? Or will you be posed doing something of value? Because that's what the family does. We don't all do the same thing. We've already talked about that. We all do different things, but we are meant to do something. One of the things that we see that is a pattern throughout the Bible of these action heroes, of these people who are taking action in their faith, is that they do things without knowing the end of a thing. Do I have to know the finish of a thing to start it? Because when I live where I must be the master and commander of my existence, I do. I do have to know then the end of a thing before I start. And that is all right and good. If you are the foreman on a job, if you're the general contractor building a building, that guy needs to know what the building's supposed to look like in the end. Can you imagine going to a job site and the guy who's in charge of the whole thing, you go, what are you building? He goes, I don't know, I'll be just as curious as you. That's not good, right? That guy needs to know the end of the thing at the beginning. He needs to be fully aware of the entire plan. But what we see of people of faith, they did not know the entire plan at all. The rest of the story didn't come in till later, and sometimes it didn't even come in their lifetime. The Joseph that you know, who's the second most powerful man in all of Egypt, he wasn't Joseph in the beginning. He wasn't that guy. He didn't start out as that guy. The Abraham who wields the knife, who God says, if you will sacrifice your only son, the son whom you love, go up to Mount Moriah and do that. The guy who takes his son on a 3-day journey and holds that knife up, ready to plunge it in because God said so, that guy did not start out as that guy. Nor did that guy understand that thousands of years later we'd be talking about the thing that he did and how he trusted that the Lord would provide. David began picking up stones in a brook, and he ended by training kings. Do you think on the day when David walked out to fight Goliath and he grabs 5 stones from the brook, that he understood that the rest of his life he was walking a path where God would make him perhaps the finest king to ever walk the face of the planet? That guy didn't know that. All he knew was what was right in front of him was a big, ugly dude who was saying bad things about God, and somebody had to do something. What we find is a pattern of action is not waiting for it to all be figured out and then I'll do something. That is exactly what Satan wants you to do. Is he wants you to say, I will when. I will when I understand how it'll work out, then I'll step out in faith. That's the exact opposite of stepping out in faith. I will when I get to the point of this maturity in my life. I will when my job is more secure. I will when my kids are out of the house. I will when I'm not so busy. Forget it. That's another way of saying I won't. The people that we see of the Bible who took action, they understood they were not the general contractor of the job who had to have the whole plan laid out in front of them. I was talking to a friend of mine on the phone just the other day, and he's one of the directors of an organization called Sacred Selections that some of you may know about, but they raise money to bring kids home into Christian families through adoption. And they started that organization just because they realized there was a need, and he and his wife started it, and they started it with some very super small things, a little fundraiser over here, putting some flyers out in there, and they had a lab at the time, putting some flyers about adoption out in the waiting room, little things. Vice President of the United States called out their organization by name at a banquet not that long ago. And I asked him, I said, hey, David, did you ever think when you started with the things you were doing with Sacred Selections that eventually Mike Pence would give you a shout out? And he goes, yeah, didn't see that one coming. That's how it works. You don't know the end of the journey, you just know the job right in front of you and you do something about it. Philippians Chapter 1. In Philippians Chapter 1, verse 3 through 6. Paul says, I thank my God in all my remembrance of you, always in every prayer of mine for you all, making my prayer with joy because of your partnership in the gospel from the first day until now. Paul's relationship with the Philippians was a special one. From the very first day he met them, they wanted to be involved in whatever way they could. And it started out with as simple as Lydia saying, please stay at my house. He says, your partnership in the gospel from the first day until now. And then in verse 6 he says, and I am sure of this, that he who began a good work in you will bring it to completion at the day of Jesus Christ. Paul understood the general contractor of everybody's spiritual growth was not them, but was God. He who began a good work in you will complete it. You just get up every day and you go to work and you let Him mold your life. You grow into what you will become. And who you are today is not who you're going to be 10 years from now. And I can't tell you who you'll be 10 years from now, but I can tell you that if you will be a vessel prepared for the good work of the Lord, and you say, I will do something with what I have, where I am right now, He will use you and you will become something different 10 years from now. But I'll also tell you something else. There's a cautionary tale. He's not the only one who wants to begin a work in you. Because as much as David began by picking up stones and ended up training kings, and Esther began by submitting to Mordecai and eventually ended up standing in the gap for an entire race, and Peter and James and John started out just by dropping their nets and following Jesus. Judas also began his journey just by stealing a little bit of money from the treasury box. It's just a small thing. It was a poor man's treasury box. It wasn't even like a rich man's treasury box. It was a poor man's treasury box. He just stole a little bit of money here and there, not even enough for anybody to even notice. And you know nobody else noticed because the other 11 apostles never noticed. They never even knew, even when Jesus sent him out, go and do what you're going to do, and he meant betray me. They thought, oh, Judas is in charge of the treasury box. Jesus is sending him to take care of poor people. No, he's a thief. They didn't know it. It was a small thing, but it changed the trajectory of his life. So much so that by the time you get to Acts chapter 1, verse 25, when speaking of Judas, they said somebody needs to take the place in this ministry and apostleship from which Judas turned aside to go to his own place. That's a very gentle way of saying he's not where we're going, he went somewhere else. That's hell, folks. the actions you take change you. You are becoming somebody all the time. So I start every day, or almost every day, except for the grumpy days. I start almost every day with a cup of coffee. If that does not happen, you can ask my kids. There is a disposition difference in Dad. But I noticed something at a certain point about me starting my day with a cup of coffee. I'll get up in the morning, and I pull the grinder out, and I get my beans out, my beans. These are not everybody, these are my beans. I get my beans out, and I pour it in, and it gets to the right level, and I grind the beans to the right burr grind. I know this is kind of stupid and geeky, but this is the process. Right? And I grind them, and I put them in the French press, and I tamp it down and get it all nice and level, and then I add the hot water, 5 cups water. That's how much fits in my Yeti mug. And then I set the timer for 4 minutes. And then typically I check on the kids and I want to wander around for the 4 minutes, and then the buzzer goes off at 4 minutes, and I go back and I push the French press down, and I pour it into my mug, and I smell the smells of beauty and wonder. And then I take that mug and I either head off to some meeting or I head into my office to doing some work. I noticed something. I noticed something at a certain point, that there are multiple days, not every day, but many days, enough days for it to be noticeable, that I'll get to the end of the day and I haven't even drank all of that coffee. In fact, right now, this morning, that Yeti mug is sitting in my van right now. It's unlocked. You could take it. It's sitting in there, and I've had about half an inch of it so far this morning. Because it turns out that I think the thing I care about is not so much the coffee, it's the ritual. I really love the ritual of it. I do like the coffee too, don't get me wrong. I do like the coffee, and a lot of times I do drink the coffee, but I really love the ritual. There's something about that beginning of my day. There are times in life where if you are not careful, you will become so attached to the ritual that you miss the thing itself. And that's exactly what the Pharisees did. The Pharisees became so fixated on the ritual of religion that they missed Jesus. Mark chapter 7. Turn your Bible to Mark chapter 7, verse 1 through 4. Mark chapter 7, 1 through 4, it says, when the Pharisees gathered to him with some of the scribes who had come from Jerusalem, verse 2, they saw that some of his disciples ate with hands that were defiled, that is, unwashed. Verse 3, for the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they wash their hands properly, holding to the tradition of the elders. And when they come from the marketplace, they do not eat unless they wash. And there are many other traditions that they observe, such as the washing of cups and pots and copper vessels and dining couches. There's this entire process of living that was ritualistic to the Jews that went far beyond what God had ever taught. They were absolutely wrapped up in the ceremony of religion. But they'd forgotten God a long time ago. I want you to understand that there has always been a danger of becoming somebody who loves the ritual of Christianity but does not love Christ. And one of the easiest ways to do that is to ask, am I somebody who has, I come on Sunday or I come on Wednesday and I have these habits, I have these behaviors that I do, but if I were to ask my coworkers, if I were to ask my neighbors, they would not know that I was a Christian from anybody else. Because it is a dangerous thing to become so wrapped up in the ceremony of Christianity that you left Christ behind. It's like going to a wedding and the groom forgetting the bride. Christians must take action. Is it about the Lord or is it about the ritual? Colossians chapter 2, warns about this as well. Starting in verse 20, if with Christ you died to the elemental spirits of the world, why, as if you were still alive in the world, do you submit to regulations? Do not handle, do not taste, do not touch, referring to things that all perish as they are used. According to human precepts and teachings, these have indeed an appearance of wisdom in promoting self-made religion and asceticism and severity to the body, but they are of no value in stopping the indulgence of the flesh. Have you ever seen any of the pictures of those, the men that will sleep on beds of nails out of religious devotion and piousness? There are those in the name of Christ who every year will crucify themselves. They will physically put themselves up on a cross of some sort and have themselves tied there, and they make a big to-do out of it every year. And I'll tell you, they sure seem an awful lot more devoted than me. I've never once done that, and I have no plans. There is a severity to the body there. There's an asceticism there. You have people who take vows of poverty. And I have no doubt that their commitment is intense. But it's self-made religion. Jesus got left behind a long time ago. Am I interested in Jesus Christ and following Him where He is the way? Or do I have a religion I would like to make because it makes me comfortable? Go back to Colossians chapter 3, verse 23 and 24. Colossians chapter 3, verse 23 through 24. Instead of the Pharisees who talked about traditions and washing and pots and copper vessels and all these various traditions, look at how Paul writes in Colossians 3, 23 through 24. He says, whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the inheritance as your reward. You are serving the Lord Christ. I don't want you to confuse me. There are regulations of the Bible. There are things that Jesus tells us you need to do, and there are even things that are of a ceremonial type that He asks us to do. Every week we take the Lord's Supper, and that is a ceremony, and it is a ritual. So I don't want you to understand me. I'm not saying that those things are bad in and of themselves. But the way that Colossians 3 speaks, it says, whatever you do, do your work as for the Lord. When you sang today, who was the audience? It should be Jesus. Did you want God to hear? Were you singing for Him? When you pray, who are you praying? Are you like the Pharisee who prayed to himself? Or the tax collector who bowed his head and he beat his chest and couldn't even look into heaven and then spoke to the Lord? Whatever you do, do your work heartily as for the Lord. Do you view your life that way, that you are a servant of the King? Because if you are, be dressed in readiness and keep your lamps lit. Because He's coming back someday. And there is a judgment that He will come with. And there is a right and a wrong. But it is a person that we follow who will tell us what is right and what is wrong. And He will judge us either worthy or unworthy based off of His word. Be very careful that your Christianity has not become merely a ritual or a ceremony, and you forgot about what was inside the cup. After all, the Pharisees cleaned the outside, and the inside was left dirty. Another thing with taking action that I want you to understand is that every action begins a series of reactions to it. Let me give you an example. Why did Abel die? Go back in your Bible, back in the Old Testament, you go back to the story of Cain and Abel, and you look there at Cain and Abel is killed by Cain. And you look at all of the details there, and Cain and what he did, and how God warned him, and all this, and you say, why is it? Okay, Cain, you hear a lot about Cain, but you hear very little about Abel. Isn't it interesting in the story of Cain and Abel? Abel actually isn't talked about very much. It's mostly Cain that you hear about. Why did Abel die? Well, the answer is very clearly stated in the New Testament. Turn over in your Bible to 1 John chapter 3. 1 John chapter 3, verse 12. 1 John chapter 3, verse 12 says, "We should not be like Cain, who was of the evil one and murdered his brother." And why did he murder him? That's the question. Why did Abel die? Why did he murder him? Because his own deeds were evil and his brother's righteous. Because his own deeds were evil and his brother's righteous. Why did Abel die? Because every action leads to a reaction from somebody else. And you need to understand that if you take action as a Christian, there will be a reaction. Some of it will be positive, but there will oftentimes be many negative reactions because Satan and those who follow him will not be happy. I had the immense pleasure of baptizing Jesse just yesterday. And he came out of the water, and you know, sometimes when people come out, you just know how excited they are. You can feel it. And he was so excited. And I told him afterwards, he dried off, and we're sitting around talking with family, and I told him, I said, "Do you see how happy everybody is? We're all excited. Like this is the moment." His sister said, "I have prayed for this day." We're all happy, but there is one being who is very, very unhappy right now, and that's Satan. When you take action on behalf of the Lord, when you say, "I'm going to follow Jesus," you are guaranteed to get a negative reaction from some. Abel's good behavior brought out the worst out of Cain. I want you to learn to take action and guard your heart too. I want you to learn to take action and to be a Christian and tell your heart ahead of time, if it's hard, that doesn't mean I'm doing it wrong. Because the moment you begin to say, "I'm going to do more than just the lip service of being a Christian, but I really want to live this thing. I want to know what it's like to follow Jesus, to take His word and read it and then try and do it." I mean, that may be as simple as you start reading through the Proverbs, and every time you run across a proverb, you go, "I'm just going to try and live that proverb today." I will tell you, if you read a proverb about watching your temper and being slow to speak, and you go, "Today I'm going to follow that one," that will be the worst day. I can guarantee you, Satan's going to go, "Oh, today he's going to watch his tongue. Today Scott has set and purposed in his heart that today he's going to be patient and slow to speak. Let's throw everything at him." You've had days like that, haven't you? Right? Love is kind. I'm going to do that one today. I'm just going to be love is kind today. And then you get on the freeway and there's 14 different accidents. And road construction, and there's 30 guys and all of them are holding coffee mugs except for one. Right? Love is kind. You will be tested the moment you say you're going to do something. And that doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. It means you're doing it. This world is not perfect. It's not easy. Remember when Nehemiah's men went to build the walls? They carried a sword on their hip for a reason. It wasn't just building the walls, but defending them as they were building them. That's what you're doing. That's what you're doing as a Christian. You're building the walls up. You're building a life. You're building yourself up as a living stone, and you got to guard it while you build it. Ephesians chapter 6 talks about taking up the shield of faith with which you can extinguish all the flaming darts of the evil one. The flaming darts of the evil one. Satan shoots arrows at you. And I don't know if you've ever had something kind of shot at you. I've never had an arrow shot at me, thankfully. But I have been out on a golf course before, and some dude just decided to fire away because he couldn't hit us. And then all of a sudden you have a ball bounce like 2 feet from you. You didn't see it coming. That's the thing. When it just kind of comes in like that, if the guy doesn't yell "for," you don't know to duck or whatever. It just comes, and if it hits you, it hits you. Do you know why you're supposed to have the shield of faith? Satan doesn't give you a heads up. He doesn't tell you, oh, by the way, today we got a volley coming your direction. Instead, you're supposed to be, as Peter says in chapter 4 of 1 Peter, do not be surprised at the fiery trial when it comes upon you to test you, as though something strange were happening to you. But rejoice insofar as you share Christ's sufferings, that you may also rejoice and be glad when His glory is revealed. Folks, we must act because, and I'm not always a fan of like little cutesy little things like this, but I think it works. We must act because action changes things. You act because action changes things. Remember, he who began a good work in you will complete it in the end. One of the things that we talk about a lot is this idea that you will know them by their fruits. And we go back to Jesus' teachings in Matthew, and he warned about false teachers. He said the only way you're going to really know false teachers is you'll know them by their fruit. So you get to the end, and what the tree bears, you go, oh, he may have talked a really good game, but the fruit of that tree tells me he's a false teacher. Well, that is true of false teachers, but it is also true of all human beings. Remember, it was Jeremiah who said, like a tree planted by the water. That's you. We're meant to bear fruit too. And trees, when do they bear fruit? They don't bear it in the beginning as saplings. They bear it at the end. You have to act like a Christian so that you can be changed into the kind of person you're meant to be. In 1 John chapter 3, verses 2 and 3, we're told, beloved, we are God's children now, and what we will be has not yet appeared. But we know that when He appears, we shall be like Him, because we shall see Him as He is, and everyone who thus hopes in Him purifies himself as He is pure. You don't know who you're going to be yet. Because remember, 70 years, or by strength 80, you'll live on this planet. That's the life of a human being, a typical lifespan, 70, 80 years. But you're a Christian. You're not going to live 70, 80 years. You're going to live forever. You don't know what you're going to be yet. And you don't know what the Lord has in store for you. You don't know His plans for you. So act. Let Him change you and mold you and make you a vessel prepared for every good work. Let Him prepare you for the gates of heaven. And He will push and He will pull and He will shape. And it will be awkward and uncomfortable, and there will be days that you want to quit, and there will be arrows shot at you. But it will be worth it. I think of Tabitha. Tabitha who died, and then they sent for Peter because she was so loved. Tabitha's whole life is summed up at the end of her life when all these widows are coming and showing Peter, look at this thing that she made for me. Look at how she brought us and gave us clothing, and she made sure we were okay. And they're weeping over the death of this woman. Do you think Tabitha actually understood how much she meant to everybody else? I doubt it. I doubt it. But her life was preparing the funeral dirge she would receive. How you live now is turning you into the kind of person you will become, and it is also shaping the words that will be said at your funeral. And furthermore, and more importantly, it's shaping the words that will be spoken when you stand before your Creator. Well done, or I knew you not. Christians, take action. Life's short, eternity's long. At this time, we as a congregation make a concerted and intentional decision to offer an invitation. We invite you, if you are not yet a Christian, but you are ready to become one. You're ready to put on Christ, to follow Him, to give your life to Him, and have your sins washed away so that you might be right with Him. If you're ready to be baptized, do not wait any longer. And we also invite you, if you are a Christian and you have wandered off course, you have been that sheep that has gone astray and you have been lost, and it is time to come back. If you need the help of Christians to do that, and I might put it this way, if you have wandered astray, you need the help of Christians to do that, to get back. Please take advantage. Have the courage to ask your family for help as we stand and sing together.